It's time to upgrade from this to this. What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're making a big step up. I'm upgrading from shooting on GoPro underwater to a mirrorless camera setup with underwater housing. Now if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that underwater I shoot exclusively on GoPro, and I have done for the last 3 or 4 years. They fit perfectly in a student budget, which is what I was on when I first started shooting underwater, and at a fraction of the cost of a DSLR camera or mirrorless camera with underwater housing, they provide incredible results in terms of footage and pictures. That being said, they do have their limitations. Picture quality and the ability to have full control over all the settings is one of the biggest limitations on GoPro. Now, when it comes to upgrading your setup from a GoPro to an underwater housing system with all the accessories and headaches that come with it, it can be daunting, and I know I've definitely found it daunting looking up all the options. So in this video, I'm going to go through what I've chosen, why I've chosen it, and then we're also going to take it out in the field and test the setup that I've got. First things first, let's talk about the camera. I've been shooting topside on this Nikon D7500 for the last 3 or 4 years. It's what I used last year in Kenya to get images like this, and it's what I've used for all my topside photography and vlogs. So I have a load of lenses for it already, I know all the settings off by heart, and the user interface is really familiar to me. So ideally, I'd be able to get an underwater housing for this and take it down with me. But unfortunately, all the underwater housings on the market for this particular model are incredibly expensive. I'm talking like £2,000, £3,000 plus, so it doesn't really fit in my budget. So I had to change to a different camera in order to be able to get an underwater housing that's more affordable for me. Now, I've been thinking about making the switch from Nikon to Sony for a little while now. I have so many friends that shoot on the Sony Alpha series, and they've been raving about it for years and years. Now, with the A7R4 having just come out, it was perfect timing to grab an A7R3 with the prices coming down, especially on the secondhand websites. The A7R3 has everything that I'm looking for in a camera. It shoots in 4K, it can do slow-mo, and with the 48 megapixel sensor, it's way higher than even on my Nikon, which only has a 12 megapixel camera, so it's going to be great for underwater photography. The A7R3 is actually what I'm filming on at the moment, and having had just a little play with it, it is going to take a little bit of time for me to get used to the user interface and the controls. They're not the most user-friendly compared to the Nikon especially, but after a little while I'm sure I'll get used to it. Now that we have the camera body sorted, we need to think about which lens we're going to put on top of it. When choosing a lens, it's really important to consider what subject you're going to be shooting. Is it going to be megafauna that's really big and that you want to capture the entire animal in as well as the landscape, or is it going to be more like coral and smaller invertebrates and macrofauna, in which case you're going to have to find a special lens for that. For my upcoming trips, I'm going to be shooting mainly megafauna, so I want something that's a bit more wide angle that's going to capture the full animal as well as all the surroundings as well. After looking at some reviews online, I found the Samyang 14mm lens, which is what I'm filming on at the moment. This is going to be really wide angle, which is perfect for the kind of megafauna that I'm shooting. And also topside is going to be really good for landscape photography and astrophotography, which is something that I want to get more into. The other thing to consider when choosing a lens for an underwater setup is whether that lens is going to be compatible with the underwater housing that you're going with. Not all housings are going to be compatible with all lenses. Some won't allow for zoom and some won't allow for super wide angles or fisheyes. It's good to have an idea of which housing you're thinking about going with and going on the website and checking if that housing is compatible with the lens that you want to go with. So now that I know I need a wide angle lens to be able to capture the megafauna that I'm going to be looking at, it's time to think about housings. And this can be incredibly daunting just because there are so many different brands out there, so many types of housings, not to mention all the accessories that you can get as well. Luckily for me, I have a lot of friends that are underwater photographers and that have been doing this a lot longer than me, so having talked to them about the pros and cons of their current setups and what they wish they'd known earlier when they first started underwater photography, I decided to go with the Seafrogs brand for my first setup. So this is the Seafrogs housing that I decided to go with. It's compatible with the Sony A7R3 and the Samyang 14mm lens, which is what I'm filming on at the moment. And the first thing to note about this is that these guys are probably the cheapest housings on the market. The housing itself is made out of polycarbonate plastic, so not only is it light on the wallet, it's also light in the hand as well, which is great for when you're traveling. It's not going to take up much weight in your luggage. So the housing comes with a normal port as well as a couple of zoom rings as well. This is for if you're using the zoom lens with the setup. It also comes with a couple of extra O-rings and silicone and some bits and bobs as well. For my setup, I've also gone with the 8-inch dome port attachment. Now the reason for this is because in a lot of my upcoming trips, I'm going to be doing a lot of freediving and I'm going to be in the shallower parts of the water, which is going to give me ample opportunity to try split shots. Split shots are where half of the image is above the water and half of the image is below the water. These kinds of shots are notorious for being difficult to get the exposure and the focus correct, and they're almost impossible to do without a dome port. Now, I've tried doing split shots on GoPros before and it's near on impossible, mainly because the lens on a GoPro is flat, so getting the water to ripple across it in the right way is really difficult. What images I do have from GoPro split shots have been either pure luck or taking stills from videos. So I'm hoping with this dome port that I'll now be able to get some split shots with subjects above the water and below the water, both perfectly exposed and in focus. I'm incredibly excited to take this housing and a mirrorless camera underwater. GoPros have been great to me so far, but changing from a point and shoot GoPro to be able to have the full settings of a mirrorless camera underwater, I feel like it's just going to elevate my photography to the next level, and I'm incredibly excited to go and test these out. Now this wouldn't be a very good review video if I didn't take the housing out for a test. Luckily, I think I've got a great place in mind to put both the camera and the housing through their paces. Alright, so I've had a couple of weeks to test out this new housing and the new camera as well. As you've seen, I had the pleasure of testing out in the crystal clear waters of the Maldives with tiger sharks and all kinds of other crazy stuff. And then I came straight out here to Baja, Mexico to test it with other sharks and whales and all kinds of amazing things here. All in all, I'm super happy with this housing. As with anything, there's pros and cons, so let's go through those now. The first pro will be that it's super lightweight, especially compared to other housings on the market. Because it's made out of plastic and not metal, it's incredibly lightweight, which means if you're traveling, it's really easy because it's not really affecting your luggage too much. Now the first con also kind of goes hand in hand with that. It's the fact that it's made out of plastic and it's so light makes it so buoyant. Especially when you put the dome port on it as well, it holds so much air, it's ridiculously buoyant. A lot of the time I'll hold it above my head whilst diving and I'll float away like Mary Poppins. So that's one con to consider, especially if you're free diving, because it's going to make duck diving really hard. I was out in the Maldives wearing a 3mm wetsuit and with this housing, and I needed 10 kilos of weight and I was still kind of positively buoyant. So one solution to that would be to attach weights to the camera somehow, whether that's attaching it to the tray that you're using or making sure that you're weighted more heavy than you usually would be. But that's something to bear in mind. Now something else to bear in mind with the Sea Frogs housing is that, and I think it affects all the housings that they have, not just the Sony ones, but they don't have the dial that controls aperture on the front of this housing, which means that once you lock in the aperture and you put your camera in, that's the aperture that you're going to be using for the rest of your shoot. Now this isn't the end of the world. You can set your aperture prior and just play with the shutter speed and ISO during the shoot. What I like to do is set my aperture in the medium-higher range between f8 and probably 12, depending on whether I think I'm going to be able to do split shots or not. And then I'll just change my shutter speed and ISO depending on what kind of shots I want to take and what the conditions are in that given moment. Now I definitely recommend getting some kind of tray or handle for it, just because holding it just like that is going to be really difficult shooting, especially because it's so buoyant, it's going to be dragging you up. So what I do is I attach it to this handle that I bought from Amazon. It's what I used to attach my GoPro to, so I just screw it into the bottom there and use that. It's a little bit tight, but normally I just have it so that I can use one hand to hold it and one hand to press the trigger. Now I can't tell you the difference it's made being able to use the Sony a7R III underwater for stills, and stills is what I've mainly been using the housing for. I attach my GoPro to the top here and just film with it continuously no matter what I'm doing. It's been incredible the kind of shots I've been able to take. GoPros are really good, especially for videos in the top 10 meters. Where they really struggle is still images, and having the almost full capacity of using all the settings on a mirrorless camera underwater has been incredible, and it meant that I've been able to get shots like this underwater, which with a GoPro you really can't do. Now for the most part it's been smooth sailing with this housing. I haven't really had many problems. One thing that you need to consider is that the vacuum attachment that you can buy separately for this is really good, and I would recommend buying it. It just gives you a little bit of peace of mind to know that the housing is airtight, but it's not a vacuum that you can take underwater like with other housings. So what that basically means is that you vacuum the housing on land, make sure it's all airtight, then you take the vacuum off, seal it back up, and then from then on just don't touch the housing and you should be airtight, and you should avoid getting any leaks while you're underwater. It's a little bit of a weird system, and most other manufacturers make vacuum systems that you can take underwater so that you have that green flashing light underwater for extra peace of mind, but to be fair, for what you're paying, it's a pretty good attachment. Now the biggest issue that I really had with this housing so far is that after the first couple of tries, the rubber dials on the inside that control the shutter speed and the EV compensation kind of just disintegrated and broke off. Now I'm not sure if I got a bad pair of dials or if this is a recurring issue with the housing, But it's kind of annoying having to set the shutter speed prior to getting in the water and not knowing, because not having shutter speed control and aperture control really limited me underwater, and it meant that I pretty much had to do everything with the ISO, and it led to me having some pretty blurry shots the first time I got in with the tiger sharks. But to be fair to the Salted Line team, I messaged them and they got back to me straight away and sent me out a new pair of dials, and it was all good. It just meant that in that first 2 weeks I wasn't able to, because I was away from home, and I kind of had to guess what shutter speed I needed. If in doubt, I always go a little bit higher and just try and control it with the ISO afterwards. But yeah, that's really the only issue that I've had so far with this housing. All in all, I'm incredibly pleased with this housing, and at this price point, it's invaluable how much control it gives you over the settings for videography and photography underwater. It has been a bit of a learning curve going from basically just point and shoot with a GoPro to having full control over a mirrorless camera underwater and all the settings that come with it. But the kinds of shots you can get with this housing and that camera underwater is just incomparable to anything that you can do with a GoPro, so I'm more than happy with this purchase. I definitely recommend the Seafox housings for anyone who's looking to upgrade from a GoPro to using mirrorless or DSLR cameras underwater. They're very user-friendly and definitely easy on the budget as well. Getting this housing has been a real game changer for my photography underwater, and it's really helped me elevate my standard, and I'm especially pleased of the split shots that I've been able to get whilst here and in the Maldives as well. I'm looking forward to getting back out in the water now and trying out different photography techniques like slow shutter speed and just getting more creative with my underwater photography, because having this housing now gives me so much more control over what I'm doing underwater. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you've been on the fence about upgrading from a GoPro and you've been thinking about getting an underwater housing but you were overwhelmed by all the different options and all the different things that you could buy, hopefully you found this helpful, and it's kind of giving you that push to go on and upgrade your system and elevate your underwater photography. Let me know in the comments below if you found this video helpful, and if you want to see more videos like this where I test out equipment and give you my honest opinion on them. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos. I've got Maldives vlogs, Mexico vlogs, and the most requested one, how to color grade underwater footage. Everyone has been asking me for that, and I've got a basic video on that coming soon, as well as exciting information about a course dropping as well. Hit that notification icon, and I'll catch you guys next time.